So if you're thinking about appealing your planning application, there's a couple of things you need to know. First of all, there's two different types of appeals. One is for householder appeals, and that's anything relating to a house. So extensions, alterations to a house, they all fall under the householder appeals. Anything else falls under planning appeals. So if you want to create a new unit, if you want to change the use of something or anything like that, it falls under planning. So if you're thinking about appealing, just know what the timescales are. So these are cases decided in March 2023 and how long they took to get there. So if you look at householder appeals, if you appeal, the average time it takes is 22 weeks. That's 5.5 months just to get a decision made. And that's not even guaranteeing whether you're going to get permission or not. But let's say you want an application for a new unit and you get refused and you think, oh, I'll go to appeal and go that way. I hope you have a lot of time on your hands because you'll be waiting 9 months at the moment just for an appeal. So if you want to change the use of something, if you want to create a new unit, so if you think you found a plot of land and you think putting a new house on it would be a good idea, but you get refused from the council, just know that if you want to go through appeal, you're going to be waiting at the moment 36 weeks. Now, there are a bunch of ways to avoid even going anywhere near appeal, which this video is now going to touch on. This is 9 months after your application. So if the planning process is incredibly slow right now. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that it's taken 3 or 4 months to get your refusal. And then if you want to appeal, you have 6 months to appeal. Let's say with the best will in the world, you get your appeal together within a month or even a couple of weeks. You're looking at over a year just for one application to be determined through the whole planning process, which I don't think is attractive to anyone. So just know that. So now let's walk through all the ways that you can look at a site, assess a site for yourself to find out whether or not you can get planning permission for something or the likelihood of you getting planning permission for something so that you never have to worry about this whole appeal process. If you want to learn more about the planning process and how you can unlock value out of any property, click the link below to learn more.
So if you want to avoid going to appeal altogether, there are 3 main things that you need to do to give yourself the best idea as to whether or not there is planning potential of a site. The first and most important thing, and that gives you the most information on a site, is the planning history. Now, every council has a search engine where you can find the planning history of the site or the whole area. So if you're looking at doing a certain type of proposal, whether it's an extension to a house or whether it's a new unit or whether it's a change of use, you can look for that type of proposal in the council search engine. Hopefully some of them are different, but most of them are quite. Once you find that type of proposal consistently, then you can find out what type of decisions the council apply to it. First of all, do they grant it and why? And do they refuse it and why? That is a huge layer of information that a lot of people miss. They think that they see the site they just look at the site in isolation. They think, oh, I could fit a house here, I could do an extension here. But the planning history is a huge goldmine of information that so many people overlook. So the assessments that officers make of sites of a similar nature, there'll be some specific reason why it'll be acceptable. It'll either breeze through and it'll consider all the matters and it'll tell you why, or if it's refused, there'll be a very specific reason. Maybe it's just a site-specific reason. So if it's a site-specific reason, maybe there's an impact on amenity. Maybe a house just couldn't fit on that area, so you could overcome that on your site maybe. Or maybe there's a design issue. Maybe the design just wasn't good enough and they didn't have a good enough designer to sort it out. Maybe there's a local impact on trees. They wanted to remove certain protected trees and that wasn't allowable, and you couldn't actually build a house without removing a tree. That's the problem. Or maybe it's an impact on designs of the conservation area. Conservation areas are very protected areas. They're areas that want to have a kind of homogeneity of design. They want to reflect the local character, not only in the type of design of the house itself in terms of materials and size, but how deep is it? What treatments does it have to the front? Is it respectful of the character of the local area? So those are all reasons that if you find a decision that refuses a site or a proposal similar to yours, don't necessarily think that, oh, I now can't do it on my site because they refuse all extensions in this area. They refuse all rear extensions. That was a bad example, but maybe they refuse all new dwellings on the site. Just look at the reasons why, because there may be a very site-specific reason or a proposal-specific reason like design or something like that you could easily overcome. Now, if you didn't do that planning history search, you wouldn't have that information to then make that proposal better so that then you can make a case for your site being acceptable. So the planning history is really massive. So you can search by proposal, like I just said, depending on what you're doing. But you could also search for like a local area. So if you're on a particular street and you're looking at doing something similar to someone down the road or nearby, you can search by street, or you can search by postcode even to get an idea as to what proposals are being proposed there, but also what decisions are being made in relation to that local area. Because if you search by local area, that gives you an idea as to what people are even considering applying for. That will give you an idea as to the ambition and the scale of what you can do in your local area. You might want to do a 6-meter extension and you think that you could do that, but the planning history of the local area shows that people are only applying for 3-meter extensions. Why is that? Well, there may be a reason why, because the conservation area or whatever reason. So the planning history is a very, very valuable piece of information that a lot of people overlook. And the other little nugget of information that a planning history search will give you, if you look closely, is to the level of objection. Now, the levels of objection to a proposal can be one of the biggest indicators as to whether or not something's going to be successful. If you find that there's a lot of refusals in the area and there's loads and loads of objections, that might be a strong indicator as to whether or not you want to pursue anything, because overcoming the local community and their local objections can be one of the biggest hurdles. Planning somehow brings out a lot of emotion in people, and it tends to be those that shout loudest are the ones that impact the development the most. So if you're finding the local areas full of, so sometimes there are local groups that come together to collectively object to planning applications, or if you're in a conservation area, there may be a conservation area group that comments on applications on the conservation area's behalf. Those are really important things you need to know, because if those local people are objecting or those local groups are objecting, you want to find out why, what are their reasons, what are their considerations. And it might be an idea to approach them if you're considering a proposal on your site to kind of talk them down, or talk to them as to what their main issues are and how your design or your proposal could mitigate those concerns. I've spent a lot of time on the planning history, and to be honest, the planning history encompasses most of what I'm going to talk about. But the second thing you can do is the planning policy. Now, the planning history will show you what relevant planning policies are. So every application should have an officer's report, and in the officer's report, they will list out what are the relevant policies to that area. That gives you a very strong indication as to if you're proposing X, Y, or Z, change of use, new house, or whatever. The officer's report for that proposal will show you what the policies are relevant to that site, and that's really, really helpful, because you can then go to those policies and find out what particular nuggets are in there that you need to address. For instance, whether it's design, maybe you need to do a certain size of rear garden, or you need to do a terrace or no terraces, or a certain type of material, or scale or of development, things like that. Or maybe there's a size of house. Maybe that particular area needs 3-bed houses rather than a 2-bed flat that you're proposing. That's really a helpful information. So the policies are a really good indicator as to the requirements that you need for a site. Now, linked to the policies is something called a proposals map or a planning policies map. It's easier to Google these terms because it'll take you straight to the link. But the policies map, if you type in find the site that you're interested in, you put it on a map, and ideally what should happen is all those layers of policies should be layered onto that map. So you just click on it and it tells you, okay, you're in a conservation area, you're in this conservation area, and hopefully there's then a link to guidance. Maybe you're in a flood zone, maybe you're in an area where there's an area of protected trees or something along those lines. Maybe you're near a listed build. All very, very important considerations for your proposal. Once you know what the policies are, you can then go to that policy, find out what the requirements are, and then address them within your proposal. And then lastly, once you've had that information, the next bit of evidence, so once you're furnished with the planning history in your mind, okay, there's been a refusal down the road, there's been an approval down the road for this. There doesn't seem to be much going on here. The policies are this. There's a flood zone. We're in a conservation area. There's a listed building over there. You then can go on site and do an assessment on your own as if you were a planning officer. It's not really any different to a planning officer, but when you're on site, you need to think like a planning officer. So there are certain things that people will think about. First of all, they know that all those things that you've already identified, well, they should know, all the things that you've identified in your prior research. To be honest, some planning officers, when they go on site, haven't done the level of research that you would have done before when you've gone to a site. But when you go on site, you need to have all of those considerations that you've just found out. You need to have an idea in the back of your head what the planning history is and what the local policies are and what the local constraints are, because that gives you a desktop understanding as to the constraints of the site. And then when you go on site, the next thing you need to look at is, okay, this row of buildings is X high, maybe I'm looking at a proposal of a similar site. Similar size? Is there going to be an impact on someone's amenity? So if you're proposing something, are you going to be overlooking their back garden in an unfair way, or are you going to going on site will give you an idea as to the materials, the quality of the area used, how is your site looked at from distance and close by? Will it enclose the neighbours? I've already touched on this, but will it overlook? These are all considerations that you could think about that will give you an idea. Now, these are all it may seem like there's a lot to consider, but so many people don't do this, and it's a very, very easy way of finding out what the chances of success are. So many people go to a site and they design what they want first. Okay, I want a 3-bed house here. It's the only way that this site is viable, and they buy it on that assumption. Whereas if before they bought the site, they got anywhere near it, they did this assessment. Okay, it doesn't look like a 3-bed house could fit here. It looks like more like a bungalow will fit there. And these are the reasons why. Because it's in a conservation area full of bungalows, because there's a listed building nearby, because the certain materials need to be considered in their local area, whatever it is. If you've done that research before, you'll be ahead of the game of so many other people, and it'll be so much quicker for you, because if you've done all that research, you've effectively built the parameters of what you can and can't do. And if you stay within those parameters, then the chances of you getting permission for something are much, much higher than if someone were to just go in, I'm going to go in all guns blazing, massive house, this is what I want. We're going to blaze through the planning department. We're going to argue with tooth and nail. And it's very likely they're going to get refused and get stuck in that whole appeal process. And then a year down the line, they're back where they started. I've seen it so many times, and it's a waste of so much time and money that people spend on these things thinking they know better than the system. But if you just do these basic bits of research that with time you can perfect and master, so that you can actually be ahead of the council when you submit. Because a lot of people go to the council and they think that what they're saying is gospel, or what the inspector is saying is gospel at the appeal stage. But really, if you've done this research, you can be ahead of the game, because they're reactive, they're not proactive. So if you design something that you know is going to get consent, go ahead with that. Trust your judgment. Don't rely on the council. Don't necessarily go for pre-application advice, because they will charge a lot of money and they may not give you the advice that you need to get the approvals that you want. So that's how you shorten the appeal process. Just do this research. With time, it will get quicker. It will get easier. It'll take a bit of time at the beginning to learn, but that time of research will get smaller and smaller. And then further down the planning process, you're saving yourself months and even years of time if you just do that research up.